fourth episode of the second series, saved from scrap based on the story of the same name for the Railway series book, Edward the Blue Engine, is the first episode of series 2 to introduce us to a brand new character, Trevor the Traction Engine. And it brings us another ongoing staple for the TV series, the theme of scrap. But I'll go through the story before I get into all that details. One day, Edward is heading to the scrapyard on his branch line. Thomas exclaims that Edward is not that old, but Edward knows that Thomas is only teasing. At the scrapyard, Edward sees a very unusual sight. A traction engine named Trevor who is very sad. Edward asks him why he's there at the scrapyard. The traction engine tells him that he is due to be broken up the following week. Though he is still clearly in working condition, his master decided he was old-fashioned. Edward remarks that he gets told the same thing, but the Fat Controller says he's a useful engine. Trevor then tells Edward about his old life. He would travel from farm to farm doing various jobs, and children would be excited to see him and took rides on him. He closes his eyes and remembers that he likes children.
Oh yes, I like children. Kids, is he okay? Like, is he on something?
Edward worriedly travels to the station, trying his hardest to think of a way to save Trevor. Edward tries to think who would take Trevor in, but had no luck. At Wellsworth, Edward spots the vicar and knows that he would be the perfect person to save Trevor. He and his driver explain about Trevor's situation and beg the vicar to save him. The vicar promises to go take a look. A few days later, Jem Cole tells Trevor about the vicar's upcoming visit and gives him a new coat of paint and a good polish in preparation. The vicar arrives and Trevor starts riding around the yard feeling happier than ever. Afterwards, the vicar talks to the scrapyard owner and is able to buy Trevor cheap. Now Trevor lives in the vicarage orchard, which is next to the line, and he and Edward see each other every day. Trevor enjoys his new work, but his favourite day of the year is the day of the church fete, where he has a wooden seat bolted to his bunker and gets to give children rides. And in the evening he is laying asleep in his shed thinking about the wonderful day he has had and the children he met. As I've said earlier, this episode was the introduction to Trevor the Traction Engine, who years later would become one of the most favoured and popular and iconic characters of the TV series as well as the Railway series. He is incredibly cheerful, kind and benevolent and gets along very well with nearly everyone. He enjoys basking in the sunshine or dozing in his shed, but easily grows bored and unhappy if he does not have much company or enough work to do. Trevor is particularly fond of children and loves giving them rides whenever he gets the chance. And I think it's impossible to talk about Trevor's love of children without in some way or form making fun of it.
Oh yes, I like children. Okay, I'm gonna check him into a mental facility because something's wrong with him.
And I'm honestly not the first person to have made fun of this sort of factor about Trevor. It's been done for many years on the internet ever since YouTube was even made. But it doesn't ruin my childhood in any way or form. I just know it's all in good fun. We're also introduced to two new human characters. There's Jem Cole, who is a warm, loving father figure when looking after Trevor, but when it comes to farming, he could be a strict handyman just to ensure that his job is done professionally and flawlessly. He would also be known throughout the series to be really good at mechanics, since seasons later he would be asked by the Fat Controller to fix up Elizabeth the vintage lorry. And we also have the Vicar of Wellsworth, known as Reverend Charles Latsey, sometimes simply known as the Vicar. And he was the first person to address an engine crew by name.
Hello, Edward. You look upset. What's the matter, Charlie?
I honestly think that this is the only time in the TV series, as well as the Railway series, an engine crew would actually be known as by name, since we learn that Edward's driver's name is Charlie. But I don't recall any other time in the Railway series or the TV series where this has ever happened, making this the only one. The episode also brings up the factor of scrapping, which has become a huge staple in the Classics series since this episode. As we all know, scrapping throughout the TV series is something feared by steam engines, but it's quite amazing how Edward doesn't take it seriously when Thomas brings it up with him when he announces where he's going.
I'm going to the scrapyard today, Edward called to Thomas. What? Already? You're not that old, replied Thomas cheekily. Thomas was only teasing.
Edward of course brushes it aside because he knows that Thomas is only messing with him, and it's just Thomas being his cheerful old cheeky self. It's also worth pointing out that the first shot taken for the episode was actually from the cancelled adaptation of The Missing Coach, as James's tender could be seen at the end of the camera panning, similar to how James looks in the first shot of The Missing Coach. So the crew obviously decided to just use that scene for this episode, and it's just an iconic scene in my opinion, showing a bit of railway realism and one of the things that most people associate with in the railways: hard work in the yards. Is it just me, or is that double-decker bus in the background during the church fete near the end of the episode the original model for Bulgy? I mean, when you look at it really close up, it does look exactly like what Bulgy would eventually look like in the third series. So is it possible that they reused this model to create Bulgy? Anyway, saved from scrap was our introductions to Trevor the Traction Engine and the introduction to the scrapping theme. It's a nice heartwarming episode which introduces us to our favourite traction engine who will become one of the most popular characters in the TV series. Give this episode a watch if you haven't watched it for a while, as you'll see the origins of Trevor the Traction Engine.